Hello everyone and welcome to part 10a. We've got a sad tale to tell in this part. The hopes of the nation, which under David were bright and hopeful, are now lying in shatters. The nation is divided, as we looked at in the last section. 10 tribes have broken away, and all that's left to David's line is Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. The northern kingdom begins to fall apart slowly over the years. Each king seems to be more wicked than the last. We have Ahab and Jezebel in the middle of the story, getting up to all kinds of wickednesses. As we follow the story through, we see treachery, palace intrigue, coups, brutality, and overarching all of that, the rejection of Yahweh as the God of Israel. There is a false shrine set up at Bethel, and God is angry. And in the end, Assyria, in the ascendance, conquers, and Israel is no more. The tribes and the people are taken in exile and scattered around the Assyrian Empire. 722 BC, it all ended in terrible tragedy. Just on a point, I've had feedback to say that some of the text I've been using is rather dense and difficult to follow, me speaking and the words. So I've taken some advice and I've redone it. I hope it makes it more helpful. So with that note, let's begin. Here we begin part 10a with the timeline. In green, the timeline of the northern kingdom, and just as in contrast, the timeline of Judah, which of course we will look at more fully in the next part. As you can see, many of the reigns are very short-lived. Nadab reigned 1 year, palace coup. Baasha reigns quite a long time. Elah, another 1 year, and Zimri doesn't even last a year. Omri lasts a bit longer, and then we have Ahab, and Ahab in his 19 years causes an amazing havoc in the nation. And so after Ahab, Ahaziah, another year, and so it goes on down the list until you come to the end where the monarchs are tumbling, and by 722, of course, Assyria had taken over the nation and exiled the people, and the 10 tribes ceased to be. Judah stumbled on for a bit longer, but as I said, we'll look at that in the next part. Here's a breakdown of the chapters, and what I've done here is I've just followed the story of the Northern Kingdom through, so that if you want to read the text through and see what happens in through the time, then you can follow these chapter headings. I don't think I want to say too much more about it, except to point out the in blue there that I've not put the Chronicles passages in. It just confuses the issue. But in most Bibles, particularly in the Good News Bible, you see the Chronicles passages headed. Yeah, there are 2 great characters in this story, and that's Elijah and Elisha, and they indeed act as a real break on what's happening. They challenge the idolatry, and they make a significant impact upon the nation. And in fact, through their efforts, Samaria, for example, is defeated, and peace reigns for a little longer, though it isn't a settled peace by any means. And living through these times as the ordinary people must have been awful. It must have been really dreadful, never knowing what's going to happen next. So here's the story in very short form. Solomon, by giving a passive agreement to idolatry and encouraging it, first of all in his wives, and then as they spread through the country, and incorporating the Canaanite religions that were there already, that had been suppressed to a great extent under David's reign. They just gave full tilt to it, and the nation broke away really from that covenant that they'd made with Yahweh, that he would watch over them and keep them safe and bless them if they were faithful to him. And but if they weren't faithful to him, then he would punish them. And the punishment on the whole is that they get attacked and they lose the peace and the prosperity in which they're living. And so the northern kingdom was torn from David's family and given to a stranger, Jeroboam, who seems to be just one of the officials overseeing Solomon's work parties. But for God to keep his promise to David that his line shall live on, he gives Judah with Jerusalem to the family. And indeed, when we'll look next time, you'll see that it is a line of David that rules in Judah until in the end they are exiled by Babylon. Jeroboam tried to form a dynasty, as did several of the others, but very quickly there was a palace coup. Usually the leader of the army who decided they wanted to be ruler and they could do it better. And so there is some terrible slaughter goes on through the story as coups go on. Something that we're very familiar with in our own time as we look at some of the countries around the world. Consequently, many of the reigns were very short, some just a year or so, others considerably longer. Into the time comes war and uncertainty. Life is very hard and very fragile. One particular obnoxious ruler was Ahab, who was influenced by his wife Jezebel, who led the nation, who were now called Israel, into even darker forms of idol worship. And it gets even worse after them. Human sacrifice begins, and that is the lowest that any religion can come to. And one can see why God wanted to wipe the slate clean, because however hard through the prophets he tried to reform the nation was hell-bent on its idolatry. And so condemnation comes after condemnation. And the end came, as I said, in 722 BC, when Assyria abolished the northern kingdom, exiled the population, and brought in populations from other parts of the empire. And the area began to be called after the capital city, which was moved from Bethel to a new city called Samaria. The whole area became called Samaria, and it was Samaria from then onwards. In Jesus' time, it is Samaria, much of that part of the kingdom. Elijah and Elisha are very interesting prophets, called up for a time They haven't left any writings. They are called the speaking prophets. The writing prophets came later. Prophets such as Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and many of the other minor prophets. We do see Amos and Hosea appear at towards the end of the Northern Kingdom, and we do have their writings, or at least some of their writings. We're fortunate to know much about Elijah and Elisha from what are called the Annals of the Kings of Israel. It's a document that's been lost, but obviously the compiler of the history of kings knew about such, knew them, could consult them, though probably in the exile in Judah or the exile in Israel as well. These documents were destroyed, but we do have at least some fragments of them in our Old Testament account. In their actions, they can be seen as acting on Yahweh's behalf, so that they constantly challenge the leaders of the nation, sometimes in spectacular ways, about their abandonment of Yahweh. Just two spring to mind as I'm speaking now. One of them is the way Elijah is able to stop the rain for 2 years, cause a terrible drought. The king knows what's happened, promises to reform, and Elisha prays and the rains come back. But of course the king, that's Ahab, he doesn't reform at all. And the other one that we have the account of during famines, like the widow and her son being miraculously fed. So they're seen as acting on Yahweh's behalf to constantly challenge the leaders of the nation about their abandonment of Yahweh, their God, for idols that have no power and who lead them into all manner of depravity. So we leave the Northern Kingdom, or we leave the memory of the Northern Kingdom, and just simply point us to Jesus. The attempt to form a world physical kingdom was attempted again and again by the Jewish people, and it never happened. Even today, with the restoration of Israel, they are constantly battling their neighbours, and they never know peace. And Jesus, knowing this, point out again and again and again that his kingdom was not of this world. His kingdom was the kingdom of God, and at the end of time, he would come back and establish that reign of peace, that reign of God that everybody longed for, but never seemed to be able to achieve. And so we leave the Northern Kingdom, and in the next part we'll look at the history of Judah, which sadly isn't much different. Thank you.